Girl Meets Boy is basically about two Scottish lesbians falling in love. I mean, what more could you possibly want out of a story? There are very few things that I think truly annoy me when I am looking for new book recommendations on YouTube or on Instagram or on Storygraph or any platform where I get my book recommendations from. Because, I'm willing to concede that most people have very different tastes, different things that they like, different things that they read at different paces. However, what really makes me angry when I'm looking for a book recommendation is when I come across some sort of list that says books you can read in a day that are under 150 pages. Because I'm so sorry, girl, but 150-page book doth not a read in one sitting make. No hate to anyone who has ever made a video like that, a post like that, a list like that. Like, maybe that is your reality. However, it is not mine. I'm quite a slow reader, and for that reason, I don't often read books in one sitting, hardly ever, or in a day. A little bit more, but also very, very occasionally. I have compiled a list of 10 books that I have, over the course of the past few years, actually read in one day. Some of them have been in one sitting, and I will tell you which ones they were. I hope that this is a list of books that you could use at some point if you want to, I don't know, at the end of this year, make your reading goal. I don't think that's a reason why you should read a book in a day, but, if that's something that's important to you, go off. Or if you're just looking to read a book in a day, you have a day off work and you want to just spend it at home or at a coffee shop reading, that sounds perfect to me. By the way, if you're new here, my name is Cara, and I post reading blogs and book recommendation videos like this one. So if that sounds like something that you want to join in on, I would be so thrilled if you wanted to join our little community here. It has been so fun to get to know people on here, and the people who subscribe to me are some of the smartest people in the universe because they leave the most thoughtful, intelligent comments, and I am so lucky that these people are watching my videos. It's so cool to me. So thank you if you've watched my videos before, and thank you for being here today. Alright, without further ado, let's get into the book recommendations. The first one that I wanted to talk about is Mr. Salary by Sally Rooney. This is a short story by Sally Rooney that was published as a tiny little book. This short story follows Suki, who is a young woman in her early 20s, and it follows her relationship with her father and also with an older man with who she's had quite a complicated history with throughout her adult life. I really like this short story. I think it comments really well on the male-female dynamics and the different relationships that men and women have with each other. And I, as always, just really like the way in which Sally Rooney addresses power dynamics and the ways in which power dynamics are very often gendered. For the format of a short story, it gives enough of the characters for you to feel connected to them, but not too many themes all at once that you feel unsatisfied by the end. I do think the point of a short story is to let you sit with the themes rather than fully exploring the themes itself. Sort of just gives you a springboard, and I think this short story does it really, really well. There's a lot of themes about life and death as well, which is kind of odd because it feels a little bit out of Sally Rooney's normal wheelhouse, I suppose. But I still found it really, really fascinating. It's very philosophical, actually, and I think the short story genre really lends itself towards that. The next book that I wanted to recommend is also a short story. It's a slightly longer short story, and it is one that possibly everyone watching this has heard of before. It is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This short story was published in the late 19th century, and it is about a woman who is ill, and she is sent to a room in a manor house in which she is supposed to convalesce from this illness. But instead of actually being cured, she just goes insane because she's not allowed to do anything except rest. She's not allowed to write, she's not allowed to like engage in anything. So eventually the yellow wallpaper that covers this room sort of becomes a character for her. And it's like sort of a horror story as well. I think this was one of the first ones that actually went into a lot of detail about female mental illness. I think a lot of books now that deal with female mental health is very much inspired by this short story. So I think it's a very valuable book to read if you like to read about mental health themes in your fiction. I think it's a really fascinating and seminal text, and it's really well written. It's not difficult to follow, even though it's a classic. I really enjoyed the process of reading it, and I read it in one sitting because it's really quite short and it is very gripping. Like, you do want to know what happens. My next recommendation is another book that I read in one sitting, which is Happening by Annie Ernaux. This little memoir follows Annie Ernaux's experiences of getting an abortion in 1960s Paris, and it is one of the most memorable books that I have ever read in my entire life. I think about it almost every single time that the topic of abortion comes up. This was the first book by Annie Ernaux that I ever read, and it really made me love her work. I've read some of her other books as well, and all of those I actually also read in one sitting. Granted, all of them are quite short. Happening is 80 pages, so it isn't a long story, but it is quite dense in the sense that you really have to be very focused to be able to read the story, because Annie Ernaux's like trains of thought are extremely tightly woven. So in order to follow the things that she's talking about or thinking about, you really have to let yourself be taken away by her, sort of like just let her run with it. A while ago, someone left me a comment saying that they don't really like Annie Ernaux because they found her trains of thought a little bit confusing to follow. And I think the reason for that is that you can't really let go of her trains of thought while you're reading something that she wrote, because they are so, it's so essential for you to follow A, B, C, D very quickly. So I think that might be part of the reason why that particular person didn't really gel with her work that much. I am a little bit scared to read some of her longer works because I think I might have a similar problem. But with Happening, because it was so short, it was very much possible for me to follow that train of thought completely to its conclusion. What I really enjoyed specifically about Happening is that she consulted both her journals as well as her memories and her own evolving thoughts and feelings about this extremely seminal event in her life. I was so moved by the end of the book that I just knew I have to read everything that she's ever written. Next up, we have a novella that I have also recommended a couple of times before on this channel, and that is This Is Pleasure by Mary Gaitskill. This is 96 pages, and it follows the story of a man and a woman who are colleagues, and the man gets accused of sexually assaulting some other woman with whom he works and who he knows. And it follows the woman's perspective a lot of the time, where she's trying to reckon with the fact that she is now associated with an abuser. And we also follow from the man's perspective the ways in which the women in his like more personal, intimate life are reacting to this news and how they're supposed to interact with him, with the world, with themselves. The sort of conflict that emerges in someone when they are dealing with the fact that they know and have a relationship with an abuser. And Mary Gaitskill wrote this in the wake of the Me Too movement. And I think that it offers a very interesting take on the discussions that people have had over the years about this particular sort of abuse, this sort of silent abuse that like suddenly comes to light. And I think that the effect that it has on people's lives in general, if they are extremely affected by the fact that they have now been associated with an abuser and knowing what that means, because you, from your female perspective, know that that means something different. It's such a nuanced novella. I am extremely impressed that someone could write this, because the ideas that are presented are so well executed in such a short amount of pages. I don't think I read this in one sitting, but I did read it over the course of an afternoon. So it's definitely one that really, like, it keeps you coming back. And I really appreciated the effort and craft that went into writing this novella, because I think that it is definitely something that can be expanded upon, but ultimately it's something that is more impactful in a shorter amount of words. My next recommendation is another book that I read over the course of an afternoon, and that is Mothering Sunday by Graham Swift. I actually had zero expectations for this book. I didn't know anything about it. I wasn't sure if I was going to like it, and it ended up being one of my favorite books that I read last year. So I have spoken about this in my 2024 wrap-up, but this book follows Jane Fairchild, who is a young woman working at a manor house, like somewhere in England, I don't know, and it follows a day in her life on Mothering Sunday, which is like an outdated holiday, and the events on this day that led to basically what happened for the rest of her life. And she's reflecting on this particular day at a later stage in her life, and she's thinking about how this was basically a catalyst for how the rest of her life would unfold. And it is such a fascinating book because it's about so many different things, and I think it really unpacks them in a very interesting way. It's about the life of a writer. It is about love. It is about sex. It is about grief. It's about so many things and how they can be interwoven, and it's about memory especially as well, and the memory of all those different things, and how memories can change over time, and how our experiences also change our memories, or our perceptions, or our interpretations of our memories. I just think it's so well done. It's such a clever book. It's so fun to read as well. Like, Graham Swift has a very acerbic writing style that I really enjoyed. I definitely want to read more of his work. So if you have any Graham Swift recommendations for me, I would absolutely love to know. Another book that I read over the course of an afternoon, this was like the lazy Sunday afternoon book for me. It's an Ali Smith book. All Ali Smith's books, typeface is quite big as well. I always forget, and then I open one of her books and I'm like, oh yeah, and it's not justified either. It kind of looks like a prose poem when you open the book. I read Girl Meets Boy over the course of an afternoon, and it is honestly such a fun book. This one was published in Canongate's Modern Retelling Mythology series. There are some other authors who also wrote for this series, like Margaret Atwood and Jeanette Winterson and David Grossman, I think, as well. So there are like really good books in this series. I quite enjoyed it. I think it's a pretty good series. I want to read more of them. In Girl Meets Boy, Ali Smith is retelling the myth of Ovid's metamorphosis. Girl Meets Boy is basically about two Scottish lesbians falling in love. I mean, what more could you possibly want out of a story? It's about a sister relationship between one of these Scottish lesbians and her sister, and then the person that she falls in love with, and it is also about environmentalism. I mean, it's ticking a lot of boxes for me, and I really just enjoyed this whole process. I'll be honest, I read this book a couple of years ago, and I don't remember that much about the exact details of this one, but I do know that it really made me happy, and that is truly the most that you can ask of an Ali Smith book. Didn't really stick with me, but it is a fun book to read, I think, over the course of an afternoon if you want just a joyful, queer lit fic book. Next up, we have LMNOP by Mark Dunn, which is about a girl called LMNOP who lives on this fictional island of Nollop. And on this island, they believe that the phrase, "the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog," was given to them by like some sort of universal power, and that they should worship and honor this particular quote. And this quote is written on the government building, and one day the letters on this government building start to fall off. And as these letters fall off, the government bans people from using that letter, or using like a certain percentage of that letter whenever they are speaking or writing. So this whole book is an epistolary novel. So LMNOP is writing letters to different people in her life, and they're writing letters back. So you really get to see like the weird ways in which they find to communicate things. And I think it's just such a clever way to show the effect that censorship can have on a society, and the ways in which people find loopholes for that, and that you can't ever really stop humans communicating with one another. Like, language will always find a way. I think it's really, really well done. It executes really well what it sets out to do, and I think it's a very unique book. This is an interesting one. I don't normally recommend murder mysteries, but I have The Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie. This is actually the first book in a Hercule Poirot series, and I read it over a summer holiday, I think, like in an afternoon on a summer holiday. I said before that I struggle sometimes to like visualize murder mystery stories. Like, I prefer to watch them in a movie or in a TV show format. But Agatha Christie, I mean, I don't have that problem. I really like this particular story. I won't tell you what happens. If someone dies and Hercule Poirot figures out who it was, like someone's poisoned, whatever. But I think this is a really nice one to read quite quickly because, you know, you want to know what happened. It's a murder mystery. That's the whole conceit of the story. But I think that in general, murder mysteries are quite nice to read quite quickly, especially if they aren't extremely long. The Mysterious Affair at Styles is like 250 pages or so, so it's not a very thick book, and I think you do get through it quite quickly because the format sort of forces you to. I got through it quite quickly, so I think that's a good sign. But I think any Agatha Christie would probably be a good bet here. Our next one here is actually a recent addition to this list of books that I read in one day. This book I actually read over, I want to say, a 24-hour period. I didn't read it in one sitting or in an afternoon, but I started it, I think, at about 2 p.m. on a Saturday, and then I finished it before 2 p.m. on the Sunday. And that book is In the Dream House by Carmen Machado. This is Carmen Machado's memoir on an abusive relationship that she had with a girlfriend in her early 20s. I think it's such an interesting look at the way in which abuse manifests itself in queer relationships, and the lens through which Carmen Machado views this particular relationship is very unique and fascinating. She brings in a lot of academic sources, but like she writes about in the book, there aren't extremely many academic sources about queer abuse. First of all, there's very little literature about abuse, and there's very little literature about queer relationships as well. So a combination of those two things is very difficult to find. I think this book is an extremely well executed memoir. However, I personally didn't like her writing style that much. I found the substance of the book to be more interesting than her writing style. It's not a writing style that really gels with me, which is, you know, not a criticism for her. I know a lot of people absolutely love this book. It's rated very highly, and for good reason. Like, it covers a very interesting topic. It's definitely a topic that I think a lot of people might look for and that they might not find in another place. So I'm very glad for their sake that this book exists, but I am not a very big fan of the particular writing style. I would say that the reason why I was able to read this book so quickly is because the chapters are extremely short. I think they're like maximum 4 pages long, so you can really just get through it very quickly. It doesn't take a lot of brain power to sort of like get through a whole section, which I think is very helpful, especially because of the heavy subject matter. And I really appreciated that because every single section brings sort of like a new perspective to what she's writing about. It's very fascinating to see her throw different lights on them. And I thought it was interesting for the first like 100 pages or so, but then it got a little bit repetitive for me. I don't think other people had that experience of reading this book. Maybe I had that experience because I read it so quickly. I don't know. But I think it is possible to read this book very quickly because of these short chapters. I don't know if you should lean into that though. But let me know what your thoughts were on the book, and if you read it in the same way as I did, and if your experiences were similar or very different to mine. I would be very fascinated to know more about that. And then we have our final book on this list, which is Beach Read by Emily Henry. This book in particular I did read in one day, but I have read multiple other romance novels over the course of a day in a weekend, because a lot of the time if I have my period over the weekend, I like to just sit down with a romance book for 12 hours and do nothing else but feel sorry for myself and giggle and kick my feet on the couch. So I've done this with a couple of books before, and Beach Read was one of them, which is why I've included it in this list. So Beach Read is about January and Gus, who are both authors who come to this, is it Lake Michigan? I know nothing about the Great Lakes in America, I'm so sorry, but I think it's Lake Michigan, where they go for a summer holiday because they are both writers and they want to complete the novels that they are working on. Gus is like a lit-fic writer and January is a romance writer, and they both have writer's block, and they also have some history from when they knew each other at university. So it's a very interesting like premise, and I think it is a really fun story to follow. They basically like they meet each other again because they live next door to each other, and then they challenge each other to write in the one another's genres, which I think is a very fun premise. I love the characters' dynamics, I love their banter, I love both of the characters in their own right, which I think is really hard to do sometimes in a romance, especially if it's just from one person's perspective. And I know this was a lot of people's favourite Emily Henry book, and I can see why. It's not mine. People We Meet on Vacation is my favourite, but I totally understand why so many people love this one. It is a great beach read, I would think as well. I didn't read it on the beach, I read it on the couch with my heating pad. And those are all of the books that I wanted to talk about for today's video. All the books that I think you could read over the course of one day. I hope that you get a couple of recommendations out of this if you're planning on having a reading day or reading afternoon sometime in the future. And let me know if you do end up reading any of these in a single sitting or in a single day. I would love to know if my experience is similar to yours in that particular regard. And if you are a slow reader as well and you have any recommendations for books that you read in a very short amount of time, I would love to know that as well, because, you know, sometimes you just need to sit down, lock in, and read a book in 1 or 2 sittings. That is everything from me for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week in another video. Goodbye.